Welcome to MyLife, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A gute Woche and a gut and gebencht Jahr. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer Tanya, and when more appropriate that in these days, as we go from Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur into Sukkot, introspection and accountability, looking into our hearts and souls, renewal, sanctification, and joy. And Tanya gives us the tools to actually experience and implement this transformation. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC, and it is in honor and memory of Rabbi Yosef Halevi Weinberg Olav Shalom, Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKohen Katz Olav Shalom, Rabbi Yoel HaKohen Khan Olav Shalom, and is in l'schus and merit of Rabbi Zev Yecheskel and Risha Katz La'erich Yomim V'Shanim Tevis for many healthy, long years. We are in the middle of chapter 3, Perek Gimel of Tanya, discussing the Nefesh HaLekis, its very anatomy, which is structured, its building blocks in the 10 faculties, which are broken into two, intellect and emotions, the cognitive and the feelings, and how they work together. And bear in mind, we're talking about the divine soul. So it's all about a divine experience in its purest form. As I discussed in the last year, it's fascinating and so critical to see the Nefesh HaLekis in its full glory without the impact of its battle with the animal soul. So when we look at the divine soul, what does it look like in its natural habitat? That's what we're learning now. And its natural habitat, the mind and the emotions, which constitute the conscious faculties and attributes of the divine soul, are all divinely consumed. Now this is something we have to step back for a moment and appreciate and focus on. You see, we human beings, we are a divine soul that's already manifest inside of a guf and nefesh habamis, a body and an animal soul. And what we're accustomed to most is being drawn and attracted emotionally, and also our minds, in materialism, in the material world. We're not even talking about things that are forbidden or prohibited. What are we busy with most of the time? We're working, trying to make ends meet, pay our bills. We're dealing with our own personal challenges, whether it's our relationships, children, community. Even on a very neutral level, our immersion is not fully divine. Yes, in the morning we wake up, we say Moeda'ani, we daven, and we try to focus as much as we can on godliness. But it's definitely not the predominant element in our lives. Tanya, and in general Torah, Chassidus, but specifically Tanya is coming to teach us to recalibrate and redefine ourselves. That you do not have to be defined by the material world. We were sent here on a mission. Dafka in this world, and this is what later chapters in Tanya will discuss, why we were sent here. But we were sent here to be divine entities, to be divine ambassadors of divine light, of the Ein Sof in this world. So yes, we have to struggle, we have the battles, we have to overcome these challenges, but to do so, we need to first understand what resources we have, and that's what we're discussing now. The divine resources that are embedded right inside of you right now, in your neshama, in your nefesh HaLekis, the divine soul that was so brilliantly explained in chapter 2. What is the divine soul? Even as the soul branches off into all its levels, always remains and retains its integrity and preserves its divine nature. Here we're talking about how that manifests in actual experience. So to sum up what we've learned, it begins, and we're talking on the conscious level, the conscious faculties, nefesh, ruach, neshama. Not discussing chay yechida here, even though it's hinted to in some references, which I'll mention as we continue learning. But nefesh, ruach, neshama, the conscious faculties, chabat chagas nihi, which breaks in general, as he says right in the beginning of the chapter, into the two categories, moichin and midas, seichel and midas. Chabad, chochma bina das, which give birth to the midas, the 7 emotions. The focus here right now is on chochma and bina, the father and the mother, And the emotions, he focuses primarily on Ava and Yira, with a little mention of Tiferes. Soon he'll say everything else branches from there. So what did we learn about this? That when a person contemplates, then what are they contemplating on? They're not contemplating, which you can ask the question, why aren't we contemplating on the Chelik Elikam and Mal Mamish? The divine soul is one with Elikus. It's a Chelik Elikam and Mal Mamish. Vayipur Bapar Nishmas Chaim. A whole chapter 2. Why don't we just contemplate on that? Because the Alter Rebbe is not talking now about the contemplation of our natural connection to the divine. He wants it to become part of our personality and also in our faculties. Yes, the soul is naturally connected. So he's saying, now when you concentrate on and you focus on, like he says, the words of the Alter Rebbe were, the exact words, that when you're, when it, he says, does the following, so we're focusing on a very active and very deliberate, concentrated idea. Not just that our neshama is one with godliness, but that even in the seichel and the midas, that as we relate to existence, we look at the divine and we say, look at this greatness, God filling existence, transcending existence. And the Gabi the Etzem, the core of the divine, everything is nullified. That in turn gives birth, it gives birth and it awakens. It gives birth and awakens. Midas yiras haremamus b'meiche u'machshavte. So first, the midas yiras haremamus, as we discussed, that when you contemplate on this greatness and how it's so beyond us, we stand in awe. We stand in awe of something so great. We stand shamed by it, in a good way shamed, humbled. Migdulas is baruch, she'en lo sov v'tachlis, that has no limit. So we sense something that is completely beyond us. That's a sense of awe. That awe in the mind comes into pachad Hashem b'liboy, into a reverence and a trepidation in the heart, that you actually feel in your heart a certain sense of tension, but good tension, a tension of being in the presence of absolute majesty and greatness completely beyond us. V'shuv, that's the yira and the pachad. V'shuv yislav libay, and following that causes that the heart gets inflamed, enraptured, ba'ava azo kerish be'esh, in a powerful and intense love. And now he's going to give descriptions of what this intense love is. Kerish be'esh, like a flaming fire. This comes from Shir Hashirim. And then he says, B'chasheka, v'chafetza, v'tshuka, v'nefesh shekaka. Shekeka. So let's now break this down. I began discussing it in the last year. This is where we stopped, more or less. So you see here all these different expressions. So it's already pointed out that some of these expressions come from Medrash. This comes from Bereshis Rabbah, where he talks about these different expressions and doesn't use them all. But in Bereshis Rabbah, Pasha Pei Zayin, that's 87, he talks about these different expressions. And they essentially are higher, they're progressive levels, higher and higher in love. If you think about it, then let's try to translate it as closely as possible. So first of all, an intense love, he starts with that. Burning in his heart, firing in his heart, is ignited in his heart is an intense love, ava aza. Then he says, kirish be'esh, like a flaming fire. So it's not like a low fire, it's a flaming fire. So love is right now very much flaming. And you can have a pilot flame that's on low burner. It's there, it's alive, but it's not that expressive. Ava aza, a intense love, and that's burning like a fire, like a flaming fire, clearly creates a much more intense, a much more passionate. But then he says b'chasheka. Chasheka, some explain that cheshek is more than just ava. Ava, you love something, you're drawn to it, but it doesn't mean you're consumed 24/7. Cheshek means that the desire is so strong you cannot get it out of your heart. It's constantly pushing you. That's cheshek. Chafetza is explained, chefetz and rotzen. Chefetz is pnimius harotzen. When you desire something, there's the external expression of your desire. I want something. Then there's the inner drive. Chafetza means there's an inner driving force. So you don't, not just that you love it with a burning fire, not just that you're completely consumed in getting it, meaning desiring it. That's a cheshek. But it also that internal element, what's driving that cheshek, is not just an external element that's coming from a very deep place within the soul. Vitshuka. Now tshuka, yearning, pining, longing, is yet another level. Now in some places, it says that these levels, when you count it, after Ava Azar Kirish Be'esh, he said that's one level. Cheshek is 2, Chafetz is 3, Vitshuka is 4, and V'nefesh Shekeka is 5. So some say this corresponds to Nefesh Ruach Neshama Chai Yechida, the 5 levels in the soul itself. In other words, as we're growing in the love of Nefesh, the love in the Ruach, Neshama Chai Yechida. The Rabbi Hillel Paritcher counts when he says the last 4, Chashek and Chafetze. Ava Hazeh Kiddush B'Yesh could also be seen as a general category, that it's an intense love burning like a fire, and that itself has 4 levels. Chashek, Chafetze, V'Tshuka, V'Nefesh Shekeka. And he says these correspond to the 4 different colors in a flame, because we're talking about Eish. But he doesn't explain the details. I'm not going to go into the details either, just wanted to point out that each of these levels is another level. It's not synonymous words. Alter Rebbe is not just repeating himself. He wants to demonstrate here that the divine soul is a complex and comprehensive experience. When it experiences the divine, after we had the Chabad that gave birth and awakened the awe in the mind, and then the pachad in the lev, the trepidation, the trembling in the heart, and then in turn ignited the flame of love in the soul. That is not just a one-level experience; it's a full-bodied experience. Now, this too is refreshing and very new to us because we understand love. Again, the love that we associate with most is the love of this material world. Lahavdil, the love of money, of kavod, of honor, the love of physical things and physical pleasures. And here he's describing the nefesh elikis, however, is all about elikus. So in elikus, as detailed and as nuanced are the levels of love in this material world, there's also, it's even more so in the divine neshama, in the divine world of the nefesh elikis, of the divine soul. So we have here is a full life. So someone that lives in this world is not someone that's deprived. People think a tzaddik, a righteous person, or a beinoni, someone that is living a righteous, divine life, is boring. Where's the excitement? The excitement is in this material world. Yes, they're living the purposeful life. They're living a life that God wants, but it doesn't have that whole dynamic element of so-called the fun that people have in the material world. So I'm not going to call this fun. But let's not in any way forget that I'm not talking about someone who's just sitting around and learning Torah and mitzvahs, learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. I'm talking about a person who's completely, his whole emotional being is consumed with different levels of the divine, the mind with the mamala kalam and seva kalam and kula kamei kala chashiv, the chachma giving birth to the chachma and chachma. And from that extracting Mekayach al Bina, the comprehension is completely absorbed by that. That in turn gives birth to Ava and Yira. In the order here, he starts with Yira Saremim was because we're talking about the divine soul, so the first thing is its appreciation and the awe of the divine that's completely beyond. But that in turn turns into a fiery love. And with all these levels to demonstrate, it's a whole life. It's a whole life. You could spend your whole life just going through these levels of love. And it's real love. Which again, the first time you hear it, you say, 1 second, love? We usually identify with romance. love between spouses, between parents and children, between friends. But v'haftas Hashem Elokecha, which we say every day in Shema several times a day, we say it, but when you start thinking about it, b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol meidecha, it's a whole life. It's a whole doctrine. More than a doctrine, it's a life and life experience. So this is the key point to remember as we go through these levels. And then he goes, v'nefesh shekeika. So you should be aflame. Again, the words, we have used different words. We use the word passion, fervor, desire, longing or pining. And nefesh shekeika can be defined as a craving soul. Shekeika from the word shuka, which is also associated with the word like taiva, a deep desire. So yes, in English it sounds synonymous, but it's another higher level, as I described. Actually, the nefesh shekeika is from Tehillim in Kuv Zayin Tes 107.9. And what is all this? What is the love and this fiery love being drawn to? L'gedulas ein sev baruch hu. It's not being drawn to neutral matters, not being drawn to material things, lahavdil. It's being drawn to gedulas ein sev baruch hu. Remember the word gedulas ein sev baruch hu was the same word that his banus began with that. Mizbanu ma'imik ma'id begedulas Hashem. And how do we come to gedulas Hashem? The greatness of God, meaning greatness compared to us. Completely beyond. You suddenly, as real as you think you are, as powerful and majestic and dignified and glorious that you see yourself or anything in this world, Gedulas Hashem. Now, not only did your mind appreciate that, and not only did it awaken, give birth and awaken an awe, but now also a love toward this greatness. Ein Sev Baruch Hu. And what is this called? He calls this Vihi Kleis HaNefesh. This is called Kleis HaNefesh. The love, Kleis HaNefesh, let's translate what that means. The word Kleis HaNefesh means, literally you can say, a soul expiring. Something completely losing itself. Even weakened, even faint. Now, we usually associate to something when you say languishes or faints as weakness. But think of it like the weakness in the knees when you lose yourself in face of something that you really truly love. So it's not a faint in a negative way. It means that you completely feel like nothingness in the presence. So Kleis HaNefesh has many different applications. Kleis HaNefesh we always associate with the story with Nadav and Avihu in Chumash, in Pasha Shmini, when they first erected and established the sanctuary, the Mishkan. So Nadav and Avihu, as the Ira Chaim explains, with their great passion, and he actually uses languages that is quite similar to some of the language here in Tanya. The great passion and fervor and longing, they went into the Holy of Holies, unfortunately unprepared, and they were consumed by the fire. Interesting, fire. Talking about the fire of love. So in their case, it was not appropriate. Later, Hashem tells Moshe to tell Aaron, B'zeis Yovei, here's how you enter the Holy of Holies. So they had what we call a rotzei without a shuv, a kleis hanefesh, and literally kleis hanefesh. They didn't die because they did a sin. They went in because of the passion to elikos, to godliness, the fire that we're talking about, pining, longing, languishing to the point of languishing and to the point of kleis hanefesh. And literally their nefesh separated from their body. We find this expression also by Matan Torah. It says, Kol dibur dibur porcha neshmasa. Every one of the 10 commandments, when they heard the dibur, porcha, the neshama took flight. Porcha means like it took flight. And the Eibishter had to return it through tal tchiyah, because the kavanah, the intention is neshama beguf. And of course, you can imagine another story that we all are familiar with. The Arba, the 4 that nichnasu lepardes, that went into the orchard. And one died, one went mad, and one became an apostate. Only Rabbi Akiva nichnash b'shalom v'yotze b'shalom. What's the story? The pardes is a spiritual experience. Some say pardes Rosh Hashanah, pshat remez drusad. They had a mystical experience, but you have to be prepared for a mystical experience. Because sometimes the passion of being taken by it can overwhelm. That's another form of Kleis HaNefesh. So Kleis HaNefesh could be literal, the soul actually expires and the person dies. And it came from a powerful passion toward godliness. They tell a story about the Alter Rebbe, the Baal Tanya. He would learn with the Maggid's son, Rabbi Avram HaMalach he was called. The Maggid's son was called Avram HaMalach, Avram the angel. Why was he called Malach? Because he was very mufshat, like separate from this world. He was like in a different reality. The Maggid set up that Rabbi Avram should learn with the Alter Rebbe. Rabbi Avram taught the Alter Rebbe Primis HaTeira, Alter Rebbe learned with him Nigla the Teira. Many stories told about these moments. The story goes, and this is written by the Rebbe Rashab, told to us in one of his siches, famous story, that they were once learning, and they got such a spiritual high, so to speak, so spiritually connected, and the Avram HaMalach was about to expire, literally in ecstasy over what they were learning about godliness. It wasn't just an academic exercise. And the Rebbe immediately took a bagel, and sometimes it says a bagel with butter, and gave it to the Maggid's son, Rabbi Avram HaMalach, to ground him. You may know that the Rabbeim, Chabad Rabbeim, when they would say a Maimer Chassidus, they would tie a handkerchief around their hand. You could see it. I remember seeing it by the Rebbe. And all the Rabbeim. It was a way of grounding it. You say by the Nevi'im, the prophets, when they said their prophecy, they would hold on to something. There was always a keli. The holding of the handkerchief was a sense of grounding, that when you're speaking in this with fervor and passion, and you actually travel there, it's not just, as I said, an academic exercise. There's a risk of flying away and expiring, Kleis HaNefesh. So Kleis HaNefesh, on one hand, is a tremendous level. How many people even come there? We don't even have this Nisayan, this test. We don't need a bagel with butter. On the other hand, it could be also Hepech HaKavana, not the Kavana, because God wants the Nefesh on this earth. I remember a beautiful talk the Rebbe gave, the Lubavitcher Rebbe gave in 1984. The famous Gemara, Sugi and Purim, that the story was on Purim. Kom the Rabbi v'shachta l'Rab Zera. Rabbi and Rab Zera came together, and they said, and they were celebrating Purim. It says Rabbi rose v'shachta, he shecht Rab Zera. And then he revived him. Miraculously, he revived him. He found a way to revive him. And the next year, he came back to Rab Zera. Let's celebrate again. Rab Zera said, Lo kol yomo, not every day, the Srachash Nisa. Miracles happen. So the question, the whole Gemara seems to be so odd. What is it? A Rabbi? Shechting Rab Zera? And the Rebbe's Sikha was brilliant. He brought all the commentaries and wanted a pshat. What's pshat? Not a remez. What happened here? Did he actually kill him with a knife? He cut his throat? What did he do? God forbid. So the Rebbe said, V'shachte, it says. Ein v'shachet elo moshach. Rabba, from the word Rav, was Megala, Yinichnes Yayin, Yotzesei, Chayvinish Lipsume, and Purim is supposed to Chayvinish Lipsume, Nichnes Yayin went in, which is Yotzesei, then he was Megala, say the Satera on a level of Rabba. Rab Zera is from the word Zera, small, Zeira, and he was not able to contain it. So in V'shachet elo moshach, that wasn't an actual physical killing. He killed him by creating Kleis HaNefesh. That's the words, Kleis HaNefesh. And then he found a way to bring him back. That's why he came back the next year. Let's do it again. So Rab Zera said, 1 second, we have to do things in an orderly way. Because even if it's Kleis HaNefesh, not an actual shchita, physical killing, it was still not the right thing. Even though it ended up being, the ending was a good ending. So all this is just explanations of Kol Sanafshi. Here, of course, he's talking Kol Sanafshi L'mal Yusa. Later in Tanya, especially in the end of chapter 50, he's going to talk about how we not allow that Kol Sanafshi to expire to a point that defies the purpose, but to come back down to Shama Beguf to make a Dira B'Tachtenim. But right now, the focus here is on the Ava Azah, the great intense love that was awakened and stimulated. And now the Alter Rebbe, he Kleis HaNefesh, now brings 3 psukim. 3 psukim as rayas for these 3 different levels. Kediksiv. So let's go, the 3 psukim are from Tehillim. Let's first read them and then we'll discuss. Kidiksiv, Nichsafo v'gam kolsa nafshi. That's the first pasuk. My soul yearns, indeed it faints, it languishes, it becomes weakened. Kolsa nafshi, that's the pasuk, Klesa nefesh, kolsa nafshi. This is Tehillim Peiches, Peidalid Gimel, 84:3. Uksiv brings now another pasuk. He said, Gam kolsa nafshi v'geimar. Uksiv, and another verse states, Soma nafshi lelikim. My soul thirsts for God, v'geimar. And this is Tehillim Mem Beis Gimel, 42:3. V'ksiv, a third pasuk from Tehillim. Soma l'cha nafshi v'geimar. Another verse states, my soul thirsts for you, etc. And this is Tehillim Samach Gimel Beis 63:2. Three expressions. Now, of course, the Alter Rebbe does not just bring psukim as a some to bring a raya. The raya to Klesa Nefesh is clearly from the first pasuk, but the others talk about semoyin, a thirst. What does thirst indicate? Indicates that you are here and you're lacking something. So you could have a situation where you're lacking something, but you don't feel thirsty. It's not bothering you. So you're not even aware that something is lacking. Then you could have a situation where you're not thirsty because you've been sated. You drank water, so you're not thirsty. You're in it. You're satisfied. But there's a level, and this is the level that the Alter Rebbe is focusing on here, that you're absolutely aware. You're aware of something. That's why you're thirsty. And you have not been sated or filled, and your thirst has not been quenched. This is what happens when a person contemplates on the greatness of God, the mamala sevev and kula kamei kol chashiv, as he said, and the yira in the mayach and machshavte, the awe and the trepidation in the heart have translated now and been shuv, have then turned into a love, a passionate love. What kind of love is it? It's a longing love. It's one that's yearning, that's pining, and is not satisfied, and that's why it's burning like a fire. There is another level of love which we're going to speak about most likely in the next year, Ava Kamayim. But this is Ava Kadish Be'esh. So the rayas the Alter Rebbe is bringing is to bring this type of element that on one hand the divine soul is absolutely aware. That's why it's a divine soul. But it feels the lack. And that lack causes it to pine and long. That's why it's attracted and it's fiery and passionate with fervor, to the point of totally wanting to be absorbed, Klesa Nefesh, in the source, Gdulas Hashem. Some say that these three verses correspond to the three levels of that the Alter Rebbe said in the contemplation. On Mamala Kalaman is the first verse, Sevav Kalaman is the second verse, and Kula Kamei Kol Chashiv is the third verse. But for that, we will discuss that more in the next year. So I'm going to stop here. And this program and all previous programs can be found at tanyaapplied.com. You could also pose any question you like. And I want to wish everyone a good Geben Shtiyar, a good Yontif, Azman Simchasenu, Kol Tuv, and it should be a very healthy and a Ge'uladika year.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit chasidusapplied.com for archived classes and more resources.